So what I have here is an Osage orange stave bow, which means that I went out into the forest, I found an Osage orange tree, one that met all the requirements that I needed to make a good bow from it, cut that tree down, split it into quarters, seasoned the wood, processed the wood, and then made my bow from it. Now there's differences between when you make a bow from a stave cut from a tree versus making a bow from a board from the hardware store. Now, a board from the hardware store will make a fine bow, but there's a certain amount of uniqueness that you will never have in a bow made from a board from the hardware store. And that's because every single time you go out and you harvest a stave, it's going to have its own unique characteristics to it that are just not present in a board. For instance, this bow has a little knot here. It has a pin knot here. When I look at the shape of it, it has a little bit of curvature to it. And the reason that curvature is there is because when I make a bow from a stave versus a board, I can actually follow the grain of the wood. So when I'm laying out the bow on the larger stave itself, which is the split piece of log that the bow comes from, I'll look at the individual wood fibers on the back of that bow surface, and I'll draw a line on the center and I'll follow it. If it's wavy and snaky, I follow that. I don't force my will to make the bow perfectly straight, because the inherent qualities of the stave will be lost, and there's actually a risk that you're going to make a bow that's weaker when you do that. The other thing that means is that the back surface of this bow is all one solid growth ring. Now when you make a bow from Osage orange, what you do is you remove all of the sapwood using a draw knife and scrapers, etc. There's a difference between the early growth ring and the late growth ring, so there's this like little bit of chalky consistency sort of wood that you can follow that down on one growth ring. You follow that chalky wood or remove that chalky wood, and then you're left with just one uniform surface, and that makes the back of the bow strong and durable. Now a growth ring is essentially a layer of lignin fibers that tree has laid down for that year to support its structure. Those lignin fibers, when they're unbroken, they're very strong in tension. So as the bow bends, that bow's going to be very strong. Now, as you're chasing this growth ring, if you nick it, then you're going to end up with a weak spot, and you're going to have a separation between those lignin fibers. And even though they're glued down to the growth ring underneath it, if you bend it, that separation between those two is going to cause that to pop, and that's going to break the bow. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to string up this bow so that you guys can see the profile of it, and then I'm going to show you how I test the draw weight on it. Now this bow also has, I added an overlay of walnut for the tips. It has beaver fur string silencers. It has a apple wood arrow rest, and the handle is wrapped with wool yarn just for comfort. Alright, so let me get my scale here. I've got my scale, I zero it out, put an arrow on the bow, and I have this arrow marked off right here at 28 inches, and that will tell me when I draw this back what the strength of this bow is. Pulling it back at 28 inches, this is what this bow is designed for. And I'm getting 36 pounds, which brings up an interesting point. In the summertime, when there was a little bit more humidity in the air, this bow was drawing right exactly at 35 pounds. So what that tells me is that this bow has lost a little bit of moisture since the summer. As bows drop down in moisture, their draw weight will tend to go up. If they're in a very high humidity environment, the wood will slowly absorb that humidity and the draw weight of the bow will go down. So there's always going to be a little bit of fluctuation with this bow. If you're a larper and you're in a really low humidity environment, that could be a problem, because you'll go to test your bow and it'll pull above 35 pounds at 28 inches, which is the requirement for that. So the other thing to keep in mind with that is that because this is a primitive style bow, it's not a compound, Your draw weight is going to vary depending upon the length that you draw the bow. For instance, say there was a shorter girl who was shooting this bow who had a draw length of like 24 inches. The draw weight's only going to be 28 pounds. So a lot of times when people are looking at purchasing a bow or trying to figure out what poundage of bow they should be shooting, it's really tempting for someone to who's never really shot to go and pull the bow back and be like, this feels really, really tough. But what I found for myself is the amount of draw weight that I can handle varies significantly just depending upon how much I challenge myself with it. There's been times where I've had a bow that drew 109 pounds, and it was relatively easy for me to draw that bow back after about 2 or 3 months of training. Right now I have a bow that's 65 pounds that feels a little bit like a challenge to me just because I haven't been shooting a lot this year. So, you know, if a bow at 25, 30 pounds seems like it's kind of a bit of a challenge for someone, if they're within around 10 pounds or so and they're growing and they're strong, they'll be able to make up that gap over time. It doesn't take terribly long. The other interesting thing about this bow is that it has flip tips and it's been heat treated. What that means is that I heated up this wood, which makes it a little bit plastic. And when the wood's plastic from heat, you can deform it. So that allowed me to add some curve into this section, but also by heating it, by toasting the belly, what that does is that drives air out of the cellular structure in the wood in the belly of the bow, which increases its density, which increases its compression strength. So that makes this bow a really quick shooter, a really good shooting bow. You can see it in its profile, but it looks like as it's drawn. Beautiful bow. And after unstringing it, you can see there's not a whole lot of string follow, which means that this bow is very well built, it's very well balanced. The tension strength, the compression strength, the tiller of the bow is not overwhelming the belly of the bow, and it's not overwhelming that compression strength, so this bow should last a long time. Osage orange is a very tough wood. At 35 pounds, this bow should last an incredibly long time. I hope that you enjoyed that, and I hope that you enjoy shooting.